We're starting a new series today entitled Rhythms That Renew Us. And so if you're a guest with us, you picked a great week to jump in because we're starting at the very beginning of a conversation of kind of a longer series. And so if you're new with us, what we do is sometimes we'll walk through a book of the Bible or we'll walk through a topic and see what God's heart has to say about our heart from his word in that. And so sometimes they're 4 weeks, sometimes they're 3 weeks. And here's what we found to be the case, that this time of year, for whatever reason, from now till Easter, we can actually get a lot of work done together as a people, right? And so if you're saying, hey, what are we doing for the next 10 weeks? And some of you are already checking out at 10. Okay, I'm done, right? 10 weeks, this is what we're going to be talking about because we have seen that this is something that we think if we put this into us as people, it's going to be able to bear life and fruit for the next year to come and maybe further than that. And so we're starting today this conversation. So all I want to do with you is to look at a passage of Scripture and talk about that for a little bit, see what God has to say, and hopefully set up for you a framework and an understanding, and maybe even begin to cultivate and turn on some lights and switches in your brain of where God might begin to work in your heart over the next few weeks, should you stay with us for that entire time. All right, so that's kind of the goal. So if you have your Bibles with you, you can turn to John chapter 15, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. It's the fourth gospel in the New Testament. If you don't have your Bible, there's a Bible in the row next to you. It's also on the back handout that you got when you came in. We're going to go there in a moment, so I'll give you time to find your place. John was a guy who followed Jesus around. He was a disciple of Jesus. It's a follower of Jesus, learned from Jesus, listened to Jesus, wrote down everything that he saw and everything that Jesus said, and he did that so that you and I could benefit from that. So as you find your place and as you kind of look for it, I want to tell you quickly a story that's a pretty famous one, and I'm not sure where it comes from, but it is something that gets repeated often. And maybe you've heard it, but it goes like this. It kind of goes like this, that there was a guy who was an explorer who went to Africa, and he decided that he was going to try to make inroads into some of the deepest, darkest, overgrown, hard-to-reach areas of the African continent. And so, like you would imagine, he set sail for Africa, and when he arrived, he reached the shore and began to put together a party, an exploring party, that would go into these areas, maybe up the river and into the jungle, and make their way into these hard-to-reach areas. And so as he was doing this, he hired people that you would typically hire for work for this job. He didn't speak the language, so he hired a translator. And he didn't know where he was going, so he hired some guides and he hired some people to help carry this stuff into this area that they were going. And as it turns out, as they began and undertook their journey, they encountered what they thought they would encounter, that it was difficult and it was grueling. And it was very hard and very tough to continue this work. And they marched day in and night out, day and night for many, many, many days. And after doing this for about 4 days, the guide and the people that he had hired to help work and carry the stuff eventually just sat down. And he wanted to continue making progress, as you would expect. And so he began to plead with his translator to ask and encourage the people that he had hired to continue to go with him further. But they would not move. And all of his efforts, whether he was excited or whether he was quiet, whether he was persuasive or whether he was commanding, he could not get this group of people to go any further. And at his wit's end, he asked his translator to say, please ask them what's happening. And here's what they said. They said, we are waiting for our souls to catch up with our bodies. Because they have been exhausted to the point where they feel a disconnection. I think this is important because the truth is, I think for many of us, we would say the exact same thing, right? That we live in a day and age and a society where if you were just to ask you what's going on, maybe we wouldn't say we're waiting for our souls to catch up with our body, but we feel that there is an imbalance inside of us and around us in the life that we lead and the pace at which we live that life. In fact, I've got a couple statistics for you. These come from a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by a guy named John Mark Comer. He writes some pretty interesting things that I found quite honestly hard to believe at first, but double check them. They are true. Here's one thing. He said that before Edison, all right, so we're talking before the invention of the light bulb, the average person slept 11 hours a night. That's crazy. Now, when thinking about this, I thought, well, you die at 40, so I guess I'm not sure how that works out back then, but that was kind of the average 11 hours a night. The average person touches their smartphone 2,617 times a day. That's insane. If you said, hey, I touch something 2,617 times a day, you'd probably say, I don't care what that is, just don't touch it anymore. Stop doing that, right? What's going on? Our attention span over the last few years has diminished. Guess what? It used to be 12 seconds. Now it's 8 seconds. A goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. We are losing to goldfish. We are in danger of goldfish. Here's something else. More than 55% of people who struggle with social anxiety and overwhelming lives last year chose to not seek help. It says that of more than 60% of the individuals who struggle with some sort of emotional depression choose to remain silent and not seek anyone. That's crazy. We live in a world in which choice anxiety and a 12-hour workday become more and more the norm, where we're exhausted and we're isolated. And we've got technology. We've got so much technology, we don't know what to do with it. We're making up new technology every day. And when we first came up with these technologies, there were commercials that we would live a life of leisure. In fact, there was a governmental study and a campaign and thing that was put forward because they believed at some point back in history that technology and all of this creation that we were making would ultimately lead to a life where we as humans were not doing anything. We're just sitting around with our feet up. Some of you with kids are like, what were they thinking? They obviously didn't have children. I know, right? I don't know. That's what happens. We live at a pace in which we go and go and go and go, and we are exhausted. And maybe you felt this. Maybe you felt the invasion of the notifications, time in and time out. Maybe you have a conversation with somebody today, and they said, how are you doing? And you're going, it's good, I'm just busy. And when you start saying busy or hurried or it's just full or it's been crazy, life's been insane, it's just, maybe when you start saying those things, you think, oh, this is just for a time. But over time, here's what I'm willing to bet this happened with you. Over time, that becomes something that you're starting to wonder if it's just the new normal. It's just day in and daily life in our world. And here's the question that I think we need to ask, and I kind of just want to start off thinking, what if what we have started to call normal is different than what Jesus calls normal when it comes to life? What if life as we know it in the 21st century, is that right? Where we are now, I can't even keep up with that, right? It's February, not January, it's gone, right? We're already in the new year. What if that normal pace and normal life that we call it is not what Jesus calls normal? I'd be curious to see what he would have to say. And so we're going to look at John chapter 15. He's talking to his disciples. He's about to leave. He knows he's going to die. These are some of his last words to his disciples. And in it, see if you can spot with me what he calls normal. And I just wonder as we read this, would you be open to finding a new normal this year in your life? That's what Jesus says. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered and thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. I wonder if you need a new normal. Here's what Jesus says. Jesus defines normal as a life that is fruitful. Jesus says, if you want to know what it means to be a normal disciple, to find life in me that is a new normal, maybe for you in this year, it is a life that is fruitful. And to do this, he employs an illustration. In fact, many people who are reading this and have read this and studied it say that he's probably doing this on a hillside. They're walking down through a valley and up on a hillside, and it's possible that he actually might be pointing at a vine and branches. And in fact, it's a vine and branch that you may be familiar with. I brought a picture along just to show you. It's this right here, a grapevine. And so if you look, what he's doing is he's painting a picture of a relationship that he wants to have with you and me. And so he's saying, here's a vine. Now, the vine would be that big woody stalk. You see that right there on the right-hand side of the screen? That would be the vine. And obviously, if you're familiar with grapes, you know that grapes are a fruit. Very good. Just making sure we're still with me, all right? Grapes are a fruit. And then there's this little tiny structure. You can see it there. It starts with the green aspect of the grapefruit, or the fruit that is a grape, and goes over to the vine, that little wooded, little tiny brown branch at the top, almost top center left there. That is the branch. And so here's what he's saying. We need to understand this before we go any further. Notice, Jesus is saying, I want you to view me correctly. I want you to have a correct understanding of who I am in your life, the correct role that I play, right? I don't want you to think necessarily of a servant or of an ATM that dispenses money or whatever your picture of Jesus is. Jesus is saying, here's how you need to think of me. I am a vine. Now, he's also saying, here's how you need to think about you. Here's how you need to view yourself in relationship to me. You are a branch. And it's this vine and branch relationship where he begins to unpack for us this understanding of what it means to have a life that is fruitful, and for that to become our new normal. And so there's a few things that I think I just want to pull out from this passage for you to understand that when we're talking about that as a life that is fruitful, if you're here and you're tired and you're like so busy you can't even think, and you're going, I don't know if I can keep this up any longer, and I start talking about a fruitful life, and Jesus starts talking about a fruitful life, you might start thinking, okay, I'm in. What does that look like? Where do we go from here? And before we spend 10 weeks talking about what this looks like, I thought it'd be good to unpack a little bit what the fruitful life is. Because some of you might say, oh, a fruitful life, that's a personal jet, and that's a check every week in the mail from someone you don't even know. Or maybe you think it's like, my kids grow up safe and healthy and nothing ever bad happens to me. Like all that. That's not what he's talking about here at all. He's talking about something else. He's talking about a source, an unending source of life to you and to me, and getting connected to that. So here's the first thing I said. A fruitful life understands, here's what we're going to get a reminder on this, it understands that disconnection equals death, or leads to death, would be another way of saying that. Notice he says this, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. And then again in verse 5 he says this, I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, some of your versions say remain, and I in him, it is he that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. He's saying that he is the source. Now think about a vine, right? So if we go back to that image real quick, think about what is it that this vine is doing. It's a living plant, I know that, but think about it. It's actually a conduit. It's a pipeline. It is an organic pipeline, and the job of the vine is to bring nutrients to the fruit through the branch that the branch and the fruit could not reach or get on its own, right? And so we're thinking through this. If you think about this, there are nutrients in the soil, and the job of the roots is to suck up those nutrients, and then the vine carries that life-giving nutrient all the way to the point of where it is needed in the branch. And without that connection and without that vine, that branch is going to die. No nutrients. Has no hope. There's no branch that's getting together with other branches and saying, guys, we got to really organize and get rid of this vine thing. We need to get together, and I've found a way that we're going to get our own nutrients from the soil. It's not going to happen. They're going, the vine is essential for our health, such that when it begins to become disconnected, things dry up and die. And Jesus is saying this is exactly what your life and my life look like. It's what life with me looks like. It looks like a vital conduit for nutrients, spiritual nutrients for you that you cannot reach on your own. We purchased a home about 2.5 years ago, and on our front yard, a lot of dogwoods. The average lifespan for a dogwood is about 80 years, which is pretty generous. But in Georgia, that actually decreases because of some of our conditions. And so the average lifespan of a dogwood in Georgia is anywhere from 30 to 40, so it's about half. And what we've found is that because our dogwoods are old, they've begun to eventually just cut off sending nutrients to parts of their branches and their trees. And so it's not uncommon for us to walk outside and then just find a stick laying on the ground. And we're like, where'd this come from? And so I have 2 sons, they pick up the sticks and they beat each other with it. That's what they do. And we just kind of repeat, and then I make them throw the stick away, and that's just kind of what we do over and over again. Sometimes you'll see that a branch is dead on the tree, and you can just walk up, and it's fascinating. You can walk up, and you just go and snap it off. Because the tree is getting older, it's conserving its resources, and it's shutting down parts of what's going on. Now here's an interesting thing. What if some of the choice anxiety that we feel of all the decisions that we have to make, what if the tiredness that and the eternal exhaustion that we feel, what if the endless distractions and kind of like constant racing of our mind, what if that is just symptoms of a brittle branch? That in you and I's life, what if it's a symptom that is pointing back to the fact that we are beginning to be disconnected from this source of life? Because I don't know about you, here's what I know. Here's what I do know about me. That although we live in a life full of technology, that when I start to feel this disconnection, I actually just end up doubling down on my desires. I actually start working harder. I actually end up like searching more, right? I actually start using technology way more. I end up starting shirking responsibility and looking to escape more rather than actually begin to ask the question of where is life. And so I've got a couple thoughts. If you're just thinking about this and going, man, am I disconnecting? Is life brittle? Maybe it is brittle. I'm starting to feel a little dry and a little lacking of spiritual nutrients. I just thought some things for you and our culture directly. Just 2 questions that I think that are fun and interesting and important for us to ask. The first is this. Where does my freedom fight against fruitfulness? So you think about this. We live in a society where freedom is the ultimate goal. So we do not want to be hindered or tied down to relationships that might drain us, right? Or to responsibilities. And so here's what happens. As I continue to go and demand that I need to keep finding something and keep pushing my life forward, right? There are structures that have been in place for years, like family, job, friends, relationships, that I begin to say no to. Why? Because I'm intent on where I'm going. I need to build my life. I need to build my brand. I need to go ahead and make an impact, whatever that means. I need to self-create. I need to do all these things. And I'm saying no to so many things that eventually I'm just being exhausted pursuing my freedoms. I want to be free to be me. Well, good. I'm going to make my life great, but you're going to be exhausted because it's just you building your life, right? And I become more isolated. Because if you hold me back or you start getting in the way of that thing that I want to do and the freedom that I want to have, well, guess what we have the ability to do? Unfriend, deleted, you're gone, right? We're done. Goodbye. he gone, right? We have the ability to just shut people off and shut people out, shut them down. And the minute that they begin to feel like that they're restraining us and they're pulling on us, and what happens is as we grow up, maybe you've come out of college life, maybe you've come out of high school life, maybe you're into young adulthood life, maybe you're just into married life or into parenting, and you're going, I can't do this anymore, right? Adult life hit, responsibilities hit. What do you mean I have to work here 3 years before I get 2 weeks of vacation and there's no more summer? Like, this stuff happens to us, and we end up feeling like, I just have to go camping and reconnect with my true self. What if it isn't camping that you need? And what if it's not reconnecting with your true self that you need? What if the connection that you need is actually him or Jesus? What if you need to reconnect with the person who knows you best, who made you? What would that look like? That instead of just dropping everything and going camping or checking out and just getting away from it all and trying to look inside you, what if we actually said, what would it actually begin to look like to, dare I say this in church, limit my freedom and build into some connection where I might be able to find life? Another question I think is important to ask is this: what am I trading for the true vine? Notice he says, I'm the true vine. Jesus doesn't say, I'm the vine, I'm a vine. He says, I'm the true vine. Here's what he knows about you, that you and I will continue to seek connection even though we don't know where that true life might be. We'll find connection in any other ways, 100 ways. This is why when you don't know what to do, sometimes you just get online and start looking at stuff. You're not even thinking about what's going in front of your head or your face. Why? Because you're going, hopefully somewhere there's a connection that can be made. This is why you've tried to join a group or a gym or we're just reaching out, and here's what the truth is. It's not a matter of fact of whether or not your connection will provide any kind of like conduit or some form of life. What you connect to will reap something in your life. The problem is, and the reason it's not satisfying us and you, perhaps, is that Jesus is saying you're looking for a connection in friends or relationships or online or in a job, and that's not the true connection. It's possible that you have traded, and we have traded, something else for the true vine. And so basically Jesus is saying, look, there is a connection, there is a life that the perfect cup of coffee and the pursuit of the perfect cup of coffee is not going to provide. There's something that mail order box subscription-based thing that drops off a surprise at your house every month that you get to open with and like have an adventure on, that no amount of that can provide. There is an enjoyment and a pleasure and a feeling and a suspense that no amount of escape room or bowling or whatever it is that you're into is going to be able to provide. And what if it isn't self-care that we need, but what if it's that we need to be taken care of by the right person and spend some time being cared for and in the care of God? Right? Here's the truth. When it comes to your heart, when it comes to my heart, we are horrible gardeners. We're not that great at gardening. We're bad at it. Which is why we have to understand the second thing. And so fruitful life is not only, you need to understand that disconnection leads to death. Maybe you feel that. It's this, that the fruitful life is cultivated by God and cannot be created by me. I can't make this happen. It has to be cultivated. Look at what Jesus says. I am the true vine, notice, and my Father is the what? Vine dresser. That's a weird word. What is that? Gardener, vine guy, expert at vines. Now, what is the job of the gardener or the vine dresser? Anyone know? To cultivate a living plant in such a way that it might bear fruit. Grapes. The aim is fruit. Notice, that's why he says this next. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Why? He tells us in verse 8, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciple. In other words, it is The job of the Father, the job of God the Father, the job of the vine dresser to create an environment and make changes to this plant and structure in such a way that fruit is born. His focus is fruit in your life if you know him and are connected to Jesus. In other words, you say, well, what kind of fruit? Well, he's talking about fruit. We know about fruit from another letter that was written to a church. There's a guy named Paul. He was the first missionary, one of the big first missionaries of the church. And he wrote, and he said this: the fruit of God, the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of God's Spirit in our life is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. You're like, wow, you're a pastor. You can list all those things off. I just know a kid's song, and I can't forget it. I'm sorry. That's just what happened. It's this crazy, ridiculous song that says the fruit of the Spirit's not a coconut. Anyway, it's a whole, coconut's not in there. But love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That is God's goal in your life. In other words, God's purpose as you connect to Jesus is that he might be able to do things in and through you and create things in your life that you cannot create on your own, that only he can bring. What's that? Love for people you don't like. Patience for your kids and your spouse, right? Joy in the midst of suffering. How does that happen? Can you make that? No, you can't. It is a supernatural thing that only comes through a vital connection with God. He has desires to do that. There's a story that's told of a little kid who he was growing tomatoes on the back porch, and he was very young. He's about 5 or 6, and as a 5 or 6-year-old, he didn't know a lot about tomatoes, and so it was his first go-around. And every day he would go outside and he would look on this plant and see if there were tomatoes. And every day there would not be tomatoes, and he'd go back dejected. And his mom watched this happen back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And here's what she knew that he didn't know, that it wasn't a great year for tomatoes. That there was a drought, and there were some bugs, and there were some other issues, and that as many days as he checked this plant, there weren't going to be tomatoes. So you can imagine his surprise when he went out one morning to find big, luscious, red, juicy tomatoes hanging on this plant. He was ecstatic. He was overjoyed. He came back inside, and he was elated. But the truth is that his mom went to the store and tied them on. You know what? I think that in the church and in life, it's easy to be like that. That when we believe that we are the sole responsible agents for creating our life, what we're really attempting to do is tie on some love and tie on some joy and tie on some patience to our life and say, look at us. And it doesn't work. It falls off. Why? Because it's lacking the vital connection. Do you know what you're doing when you're doing that? You're decorating. In the same way that a Christmas tree is cut off at the bottom and we bring it home and we dress it up, but if we leave it there till June, it's dead and disgusting. Things fall off. Those needles drop. It's exactly what happens to people, to you and I's life, when we actually take sole responsibility for our own effort and our own work in creating fruit that only God can create. Rather, and here's why we do that. We do that because we would rather own it for ourselves than turn our life over to someone else, like God, who knows us better, put our life in his hands and say, you do what only you can do. That's everywhere, quite honestly. In fact, if you're here and you're going, what's the difference between religion and actually following Jesus? Religion is just decorating. It's just tying stuff on. The relationship with Jesus actually begins to provide the nutrients, and it's God who actually then begins to allocate things in our life in certain ways so that it begins to grow. In fact, one of the commentators that I read, I love it, he said this: I've never heard an apple tree grunt. You ever heard that? They don't. You don't walk by an apple tree and it goes, ugh, apples. There you go. Doesn't happen. It's ridiculous. You don't walk by an orchard and you just hear, where a tree's working hard. It's amazing. Think about this. The fruit just grows. It's what it was made to do. When everything is connected, fruit it's on the tree. And if you cut it back, guess what? It's okay. It'll grow back stronger. Why? Because that's the whole system operating in that way. Another pastor friend of mine says this. I love it. He says, fruit happens. He's like, I want to get a bumper sticker that says, fruit happens. It just does. That if the conditions are right and the environments are right, it's going to happen. It's not a matter of if and creating it for yourself. It's something that God is looking to do. You realize that we live in a culture that is highly decorated? We are all concerned with decorating, but if you get real close, we lack depth. We got no depth. You know, we are so busy decorating. It's 50%, 90% of what the internet is. Look at my life, see where things are at. I'm putting this decoration on the outside, but deep inside, we have no deep connections. Look at my family. Look at my new career. Look at my new hobby. It's what we do. It's why we work so hard at the outside, and yet on the inside, it's a desert. You say maybe you're here and you're going, I don't know. I want depth. I mean, I know sometimes I fall into decorating, but I want depth. I just say, really? Let me ask you this. Have you given God permission to interrupt your life? And what happens when he does? What do you mean? Well, here's the thing. That whole pruning and cultivating thing, sometimes it doesn't feel great. And sometimes it hurts. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily look what we would do if we were in our lives, right? And so here's the picture. Like from the outside, it looks like, to an untrained eye, if you don't know what a vine dresser is doing, if you don't know what an arborist is doing or a gardener is doing, you could walk down the street and see someone pruning a rose bush, and to your eye, it looks like murder. Stop. What's happening? That person is over there, and they're taking sharp, very sliced scissors, and they're looking at it, and they're going, and something's falling off to the ground, and it will die. And they're going, and we see it, and we go, stop doing that. And they're hacking it back, cutting it back. I just did this to our fig tree this year. I want it to grow figs at a certain height. I took it almost all the way down to here, and it looks like I destroyed it. Looks like I'm a cruel person. And we'd be saying, stop, you're trying to kill it, in which the gardener or the vine dresser would turn around and go, no, I'm actually doing the opposite. And so here's how this plays out in your life. You have a relationship that's not going anywhere. In fact, maybe it's not godly, and God walks up and he goes, snip, and you say, well, I guess I'm going to die alone. And God goes, no, actually, you're going to grow. You're doing something in life, and maybe a job is not where necessarily God wants it, and so he walks up and he goes, snip, and you go, now what am I going to do? God, you've abandoned me. You don't know me. You don't care about me. And he goes, actually, I know exactly what you need, and I'm going to provide for that. You've got your life all laid out, and we think we have our life laid out to get the fruit that we need. But fruit is not our job, it's his. And we need to give him permission. Does he have permission to start to cultivate your life to bring about fruitfulness? Because I don't know if you've taken a look at your life lately, but this is true of mine. I make a mess of it. I let things grow that I shouldn't let grow. I let things go that I shouldn't let go. And God is the one who comes along and changes those things. I think if we're unwilling to let God do something, right? I think a couple things happen. One, we end up with very full lives and very empty souls. I think it's very easy, if we don't understand this, to come to church and think that, oh, what Jesus is talking about in here is a way to get what I want, when really what Jesus is offering us in this midst, in this moment, is himself. See, a fruitful life isn't just one that understands that disconnection is death or leads to death. It's also not one only that says, okay, it's got to be cultivated by God, can't be created by me. It's this one. It's this last thing, and it's this, that it prioritizes the presence of Jesus. So if fruit is God's job, what's mine? Maybe you saw it. It's in here over 11 times. This is what Jesus says. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. And it's just 3 times right there. Some of your versions might say remain. What is our job? What is the branch's job if it's not to produce fruit? It's to stay attached to the vine. Right? The job of the branch, Jesus is saying, is to remain attached to the vine. That's our job. Our job is not to tie on fruit so that other people think that we got it all together. Our job is to tie ourselves to Jesus so that he might begin to work in and through you and I to do this. Listen, there are some things in life that are horrible things when you make them a hobby. Marriage is one. If your marriage is your hobby, you got a problem. Parenting is the other. You don't parent as a hobby, right? It is your life. You are in it, whether you know it or not. And the parents who parent as a hobby, you got problems, either now or later, right? Another thing, the military. Do not enter the military thinking that it is a hobby. You will be sorely disappointed, right? Why? Because it's not a hobby to them. Right? What is it? It's a habit. It's a way of life. Marriage, loving a spouse, is a habitual day in and day out thing. Parenting your children, day in and day out thing. Giving your life away to the government to serve in an armed forces, they will tell you and will remind you, if you forget, in many different ways, that it is a perpetual day in and day out thing. Jesus is saying that being connected to me is not a Sunday morning trip once every now and then. It is a habitual day in and day out thing. Because I am what you need. I am where the fruitfulness comes from. I am where the rest comes from. I am where the satisfaction comes from. I am the one who truly provides lasting relief from the chaotic noise of the world. I'm the one who will do that in your life. You see, when I say prioritizing his presence, maybe some of you are thinking here and you're saying, well, if I had more time, I would do that. That's not true. I'm not trying to poke at you. I'm just saying it's not true. Do you know what I do with more time? Maybe you're more disciplined than me. But if I have more time, do you know what I will do? I will just fill it with the things I'm already doing. I will watch more Netflix. I will hang out more with friends. I will play more board games. I will read more of what I want to do. I will stay up later, right? Daylight Savings Day. We get one extra hour every year. What do you do with it? I stay up later all the time because it's not really and it's fake, all that stuff. I don't know how that works out at the end of life, but whatever, right? It's what I do with more time. I don't put the right things in it. So I'm not talking about, hey, you need to get more time. What I'm saying is that we need to consider our habits and our life and the rhythms in which we are living to see whether or not we are connected to Jesus. Here's the thing. Most of the ways that I think about progress are actually at the expense of Jesus' presence, not in cooperation with it. So when I think, man, I got to make progress in my life, or I got to make progress at work or in marriage, you know what I end up doing? I neglect Jesus because I don't got time for that right now because I need to get some progress. And Jesus says, the minute that you separate progress from my presence, you got a problem. There is no progress without me. That's what he's saying. Apart from me, you can do nothing. You can do a whole lot of something, but ultimately it adds up to a whole lot of nothing. You have to stay connected to me and my presence. Listen, this is why some of you can attend everything that the church puts on and yet still feel like you're missing something, because you might be missing the most vital thing, and that's connection with Jesus. Because it doesn't matter if you show up here on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or a Sunday evening or a Thursday night or a Thursday morning. If there's no connection to Jesus that's happening in that point, you will just be more tired and more busy, and it'll just be one more thing that you'll get mad at me because I'm telling you to do something else that you can't do and find life. The connection is with Jesus that provides that life. Listen, I think I'm so serious about this. I just want you to think about this. And it is the best thing that you could ask yourself. for your family, for your friends, for your relationships, for your future? Am I connected to Jesus? If you want to say what's the best thing that you could ask yourself for your spouse in your marriage, it's that question. Am I connecting with Jesus? If you want to say, what's the best thing I could do for my kids? If you're a parent, the best thing you could do is ask yourself this question. Am I connected and connecting with Jesus? If you're a student and you're going, how do I be the best student I can be and all that stuff? The best question you could ask yourself as a friend, as a student, as a college person, as a whoever, the best question you could ask yourself as a volunteer, as a ministry leader, right? You get the point? Is, am I connecting with Jesus? Now, at this point, you're probably going, okay, that's great. I got it. You've said it a lot. How? Tell me how. How do I do that? Well, it's great because the same guy who wrote this book and wrote these words of Jesus also wrote a letter to a church. And he has this to say in that letter. This is what he says. By this we know that we are in him. What's that mean? Connected to him. Whoever says he, what? Is connected in him, to him, abides in him, there's that word again, ought to walk in the same way which he walked. That word walk there is interesting. It actually means a pattern. It's the same word that you would use if you were to go ahead and cut out a piece of cloth from a pattern to sew together something that you would wear. Here's what he's saying. There is something in the life of Jesus that we can learn on what it means to be connected to God. And so, listen, Jesus died for you. He gave his life for you. Right? He died to take your place, but he also lived the life that you could not live on your own. And in the same way that he wants to give you his death as a sacrifice for your life and life of sin and disconnection so that you might be connected to God, he wants to give you his life in your place of your life that is a vibrant, changing, growing life connected to the Father. So we can look at him on the cross and go, that's what it looks like for him to solve my positional place with God, that I'm apart from him. He's brought me back to God. And we can look at his life and say, oh, he's here on earth. He's showing me what it means to live in relationship with the Father. The reason Jesus could do the things that he could do while he was here on earth was because of his connection to the Father. That's where his life, that's what he says. He says, I don't do anything apart from what the Father tells me to do. I listen to him. He listens to me. That's exactly where we are going. And so I'm going to ask this question. What if finding a new normal, a fruitful life, meant adopting some old rhythms, some old ways, some things that are not rocket science, some things that we've forgotten as people, some things that followers of Jesus have been doing for years. And these are not just things that are made up. What we're going to do is actually take a look each week at some practice that Jesus does, a rhythm that Jesus has in his life. And we're going to say, what would it look like if we actually prioritized that rhythm in our life? Now, a couple things real quick about this. These are called spiritual disciplines. This is where we're headed for the next few weeks. They're called spiritual disciplines. You'll see some up there. They've been called that. Really, they are practices that Jesus had. What we're talking about are things not that Jesus commanded you to do, but things that Jesus did in his life on a daily basis and saying, what would it look like to pattern my life, to adopt the rhythms that he has after what he does? What if I do that? What would that look like in my life? Right now, here's a couple things. These are not magical, okay? There's nothing magical about getting alone. Here's what it does do. It puts you in front of Jesus, who changes you, right? So we need to be clear that the things that we're going to talk about, that's not where the power comes from. The power comes from God through Jesus. All we're saying is, what if there are rhythms in his life that we could put us in front of God so that he might begin to work on us and grow us and change us? All right, so they're not magical. Here's something else you could expect in our series over the next 10 weeks. We will get very, very practical. We will get as practical as we know how. We will give you helps and aids and ways to think about it. Why? Because I actually hope that you might take some of these and begin to change the way that you pattern your life and prioritize your life and adopt some rhythms in your life that will begin to give space to God so that he might begin to change you and find fruitfulness in your life. So we're going to get very, very, very practical together. There's things that I might ask you to do together. There's things that we'll hand you that you can throw away when you get home, or you can choose to do it. We're going to try our best to provide resources for you to do that. So very, very practical. Another thing that I think you need to see is that these are very symmetrical. You see that? And so each week we're going to deal with one, and then the next week we'll deal with the other. So the first week we'll deal with one side of the coin, which is solitude. The second week we're going to deal with the second side of the coin, which is togetherness. And so each one of these lines actually is pretty symmetrical. Why? Because I think that when you look at Jesus, he did a lot of things that were rhythms, and it was fully rounded, right? Another thing you'll notice here real quick is that you don't see Bible reading up there and you don't see prayer. Why? Because these are containers in which those things take place. Right? So we're not saying Bible reading is not important. We're not saying prayer is not important. We're just going to talk about where you can put that in your life and how that happens with people, by yourself, all alone, all that stuff. Right? And lastly, I would say this. Here's what I'm hoping that occurs for you as the band comes up. I am praying that God might actually begin to bring some renewal to your life. That through these rhythms, and through a few of them as you do them, or maybe consider how they might fit in your life, that actually what happens is that fruitfulness becomes the new normal in your life. In fact, that's what renewal is. You want to know what revival is? You want to know what renewal is? Revival is an older word for renewal. It's as God's presence brings fruitfulness as a new normal. Right? Renewal occurs as life with Jesus becomes your new normal. Let me just say, what would happen? What do you think would happen to our church and for us over the next 10 weeks? We said, you know what? Let's focus on fruitful and not tying things onto us, but actually being connected to Jesus. How do you think your marriage would change if you took some time out to hear from God? What do you think your family would look like? What would God do if he showed up when you make space? And what would it look like if all of us together were doing this and talking about it and allowing God to interrupt us? And us not set the agenda, and us not make the plans, but let him make the plans and him make the agenda. What would he do? I think it'd be pretty amazing. So I'm going to pray for you. And as I pray, I'm just going to ask you to consider, is it time for a new normal? Is it time that you were being done with the frustration and the futility? Find a connection with Jesus. Start inviting him to make you fruitful. Let's pray. Father, we ask that you would show us right now in this moment. Talk to us in the space that we are creating collectively and giving to you right now. Cultivate our hearts even today. God, I pray that you would show us that the thing that our hearts are thirsty for and hungry for and desperate for is not another interesting show to watch or technology to find or group to join. It's you.